At my father's 60th birthday, my sister snatched the crutch right out from under my arm and screamed, "Stop faking it, you are just a leech!" My relatives laughed as I hit the marble floor hard. None of them knew my orthopedic surgeon was standing right behind them. He stepped forward, touched my sister's shoulder, and spoke 6 words that ended her entire world. Before I tell you how I went from the family disgrace to owning everything they love, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to wait years for the perfect moment of revenge. My name is Maya, and for 5 years I have been the invisible stain on my family's pristine reputation. Walking into Le Chateau in Buckhead felt like walking into a lion's den. It was my father Desmond's 60th birthday, and the entire Atlanta elite was there. Bentleys and Mercedes lined the valet circle, shining under the warm Georgia evening lights. I pulled up in a ride-share, gripping my aluminum crutch like a lifeline. I wore a simple gray dress, the best I could afford on what they thought was my disability check. The humidity was stifling, but the chill coming from the entrance was colder. I barely made it to the glass doors before a manicured hand slammed against my chest. It was Keisha, my younger sister. She looked stunning in a red designer gown, diamonds dripping from her ears, but her face was twisted in a sneer. "You actually came?" she hissed, blocking my path with her body. "I told Mom you would not have the nerve." I adjusted my crutch, feeling the familiar sharp ache in my shattered leg bones that never quite healed right. "It is Dad's birthday, Keisha," I said quietly, trying to keep my dignity. "I brought him a gift." She snatched the small envelope from my hand and laughed, waving it in the air. "What is this, a gift card you got from a charity drive?" "Please do not embarrass us tonight, Maya. Brad is inside with his partners from the brokerage firm. Do you know how hard he works to maintain our image? And here you come limping along looking like a charity case." Brad, her husband, was the only white man in the room tonight, and he tried harder than anyone to fit into Atlanta's black high society. He treated our family's reputation like a stock portfolio, and I was a plummeting asset. I tried to step around her, my rubber tip catching on the plush entry mat. "Just let me wish him a happy birthday, and I will sit in the back," I promised. Keisha's eyes narrowed. She held a glass of expensive Cabernet in her hand, swirling it dangerously close to me. "Oh, you are not going in there looking like a librarian who got lost," she said. Then, with a flick of her wrist that looked accidental to anyone watching from a distance, she tipped the glass. The dark red liquid splashed across the front of my gray dress, soaking into the fabric like a fresh wound. The cold liquid seeped through to my skin, and I gasped, almost losing my balance on the slick floor. "Oops," Keisha said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy, loud enough for the doorman to hear. "Look at you. You are a mess. You cannot go inside like that." My chest burned with humiliation as I saw guests glancing over, whispering behind their hands. "Why are you doing this?" I whispered, fighting back tears. "Because you are an eyesore," she replied, leaning close so only I could hear. "But do not worry, I have a solution." She snapped her fingers at a passing catering manager who looked terrified of her. "Get my sister a spare server's uniform, now." She turned back to me with a cruel smile. "If you want to stay, you can work. At least then you will look like you belong here. Put on the black vest and trousers, Maya. Hide in the shadows where you belong." I stood there, wine dripping down my leg, looking at the sister I had once protected with my life. I took the uniform. I did not argue. I did not cry. I just walked to the staff bathroom, my crutch clicking rhythmically against the marble floor. They thought they were burying me in shame. They had no idea they were just helping me change into my battle armor. The applause in the ballroom was deafening as my father Desmond took the microphone on the raised stage. He looked regal in his tuxedo, soaking in the adoration of Atlanta's business elite. From the shadows near the kitchen entrance, I watched him smile, that charming, practiced smile that had fooled so many people into thinking we were the perfect family. I clutched the thin white envelope in my hand so tightly the corners bent. Inside was a cashier's check for $5,000. It was not much compared to the lavish gifts he had received that night, but it was every cent I had managed to save from my first bonus at Deloitte. It was my peace offering. I wanted to prove that I was not the burden they thought I was, that I could contribute, that I was worthy of standing on that stage as his daughter. I took a deep breath, adjusted my grip on the aluminum crutch, and began the long, painful walk toward the stage stairs. The stain from the red wine Keisha had spilled on me earlier had dried into a dark, ugly blotch on my dress, but I held my head high. I was determined to do this one thing right. As I approached the steps, the crowd parted, but not out of respect. They moved away as if my bad luck was contagious. I kept my eyes fixed on my father, hoping for a nod, a wave, anything that signaled welcome. He saw me coming. I saw his eyes flicker to the wine stain, then to my leg, and finally to the ceiling in exasperation. He did not want me there, but he was too conscious of his public image to make a scene. However, Brad, my brother-in-law, had no such reservations. He was standing at the base of the stairs holding a tumbler of scotch, laughing loudly with a group of investors. As I tried to maneuver past him, he shifted his weight. It was subtle, a movement calculated to look like a casual adjustment of his stance, but I saw the malice in his eyes. He hooked his polished dress shoe behind the rubber tip of my crutch and yanked it sideways. The metal support slipped out from under me. I gasped, flailing my arms to find balance. For a second, I managed to stay upright, teetering on my good leg, my heart hammering against my ribs. I reached out, hoping anyone would steady me. Instead, Keisha was there. She did not reach out to help. She reached out to destroy. With a speed that terrified me, she grabbed the handle of my crutch and ripped it violently from my grasp. The sudden force threw me completely off balance. Her voice cut through the music and the chatter, shrill and venomous. "Stop faking it!" she screamed, her face twisted in a mask of pure hatred. The room went silent as her voice echoed off the high ceilings. She held my crutch above her head like a trophy and pointed a manicured finger at me. "You are such a liar, Maya. Your leg healed 2 years ago. Stop using this prop to beg for pity. You are just leeching off mom and dad because you are too lazy to work." Without the crutch, my shattered leg buckled instantly. It could not support my weight. I collapsed. Time seemed to slow down as I fell. I saw the horrified faces of strangers. I saw the smirk on Brad's face. I saw the lights of the chandelier spinning above me. Then I hit the hard marble floor. The sound was sickening, a dull thud followed by the sharp crack of my head bouncing against the tile. Pain exploded in my leg, white hot and blinding, radiating from the old fracture lines that Keisha knew were still fragile. The envelope with the check slid across the floor, stopping near my father's shoes. I lay there gasping for air, waiting for the rush of footsteps, waiting for my parents to run to me. But no one came. Instead, a ripple of laughter started near the bar and spread through the room. It was not a nervous laughter, it was mocking. To them, I was just a clumsy, attention-seeking woman who had tripped over her own lies. I looked up through the haze of pain and saw my parents. My mother, Vivian, did not rush forward. She turned her back to me frantically, whispering to a senator's wife, likely apologizing for her daughter's clumsiness. My father looked down at me, then at the check on the floor. He kicked the envelope away with the toe of his shoe as if it were a piece of trash, and signaled the DJ to turn up the music. The humiliation hurt worse than the physical agony. I tried to push myself up, but my body refused to cooperate. I was on the floor surrounded by people who claimed to love me, and I had never been more alone. They let the room laugh. They let me lie in the dirt. They thought this was the end of me, just another embarrassing chapter in the life of their failure of a daughter. But as I stared at the ceiling fighting back tears, I realized this was not the end. It was the beginning of their reckoning. I lay on the cold marble floor, the pain in my leg throbbing in rhythm with the humiliation burning my cheeks. The laughter of the crowd felt like physical blows stripping away the last of my dignity. I squeezed my eyes shut, wishing the floor would just open up and swallow me whole. I expected the security guards to come and drag me out like a bag of trash. Instead, the laughter died down, replaced by a sudden, confused hush. I heard the distinct click of hard-soled shoes approaching confident and purposeful. They stopped right next to my head. I opened my eyes to see a pair of pristine, handcrafted Italian Oxfords. My gaze traveled up the sharp crease of charcoal trousers to a face I knew better than my own reflection. It was Dr. Marcus Thorne. He was not wearing his white coat today, but he commanded the room with the same terrifying authority he held in the operating theater. He towered over the guests, a figure of absolute power, in a bespoke suit that cost more than my sister's car. He did not look at the crowd. He did not look at my parents. He knelt down on one knee, disregarding the expensive fabric of his pants, and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. His touch was warm, grounding me in the spinning room. "Let me help you up, Maya," he said softly, his voice a low rumble that only I could hear. He slid his arm around my waist and lifted me with an ease that made me feel weightless. As I stood wobbling on my good leg, he stabilized me, his grip firm and reassuring. He handed me back my crutch, which had skittered across the floor, his eyes scanning my face for signs of concussion. Keisha stepped forward, her lip curled in a sneer, clearly annoyed that her moment of triumph had been interrupted. "Who do you think you are?" she demanded, crossing her arms over her chest. "This is a private family event. Take your little charity case and get out." Marcus turned to her slowly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He looked at Keisha with the clinical detachment of a surgeon examining a particularly nasty infection. He did not shout. He did not raise his voice. He simply stepped forward, invading her personal space just enough to make her flinch, and placed a heavy hand on her shoulder. The silence in the ballroom was suffocating. Every eye was glued to them. Marcus spoke, his voice projecting clearly to the back of the room, calm and deadly. "She is not faking. You broke her." The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Before Keisha could sputter a denial, Marcus pulled his smartphone from his pocket. He tapped the screen twice, a seamless, practiced motion. The massive LED screen behind the stage, which moments ago had been displaying a slideshow of my father's vanity photos, flickered and went black. A second later, it illuminated with a high-resolution 3D medical image. A collective gasp swept through the room. It was not a picture of a person. It was a skeletal rendering of a human leg, but it looked more like a ruin. The tibia was a jagged nightmare of bone fragments held together by a complex lattice of titanium rods and screws. The knee joint was obliterated, reconstructed with metal and synthetic grafting. It was an image of catastrophic trauma, the kind of injury usually seen in soldiers or high-speed crash victims. "That is Maya's leg," Marcus announced, pointing to the screen. He walked toward the stage, taking control of the room as if he were lecturing medical students. "That is what her bone structure looks like right now. The nerves are shredded. The structural integrity is compromised by 70%. Every step she takes registers a pain level that would keep most of you bedridden." He turned back to face my family, his eyes blazing with a cold fire. "She does not use a crutch for sympathy. She uses it because her leg physically cannot support the weight of her body for more than 10 minutes at a time." He tapped his phone again, zooming in on a specific fracture line that glowed with a fresh red indicator. "And this," he said, his voice hardening, "is the damage from the impact of hitting the floor just now. You did not just humiliate her. You refractured a surgical site that took 3 years to stabilize." He looked directly at Keisha, who had gone pale beneath her heavy makeup. My parents stood frozen, their mouths slightly open, unable to look away from the gruesome reality glowing on the screen. The truth was 50 feet high and impossible to ignore. "That injury is consistent with a high-velocity impact," Marcus continued, relentless. "The kind of impact sustained when a car hits a concrete wall at 60 miles per hour. The same accident that happened 5 years ago. The accident where the driver walked away without a scratch because the passenger took the entire force of the collision." The room was deathly silent. No one was laughing now. The investors, the family friends, the social climbers, they all stared at the screen, then at me, and finally at Keisha. The golden child was shrinking, looking small and terrified for the first time in her life. Marcus walked back to my side and wrapped his arm around me again, presenting a united front against the people who shared my blood, but not my heart. "You called her a leech," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "But looking at this X-ray, I see only one person in this room who has been drained dry. And it is not Maya." The heavy oak doors of the VIP suite slammed shut, cutting off the murmurs of the stunned crowd outside. The silence that followed was suffocating, thick with the smell of expensive cologne and fear. My father Desmond locked the door with a trembling hand, his face a mask of panicked fury. He turned to us, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for a way to erase the last 10 minutes of his life. I leaned heavily against Marcus, my leg throbbing with a sickening pulse that made my vision swim. I waited for my mother to ask if I was okay. I waited for her to look at the leg her favorite daughter had just assaulted. Instead, Vivian crossed the room in 2 strides. The sound of her hand striking my cheek echoed off the silk wallpaper. It was not a slap of discipline. It was a strike of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You selfish little wretch!" she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "Are you happy now? You just humiliated your father in front of the governor, in front of his investors. Is that what you wanted?" I clutched my stinging cheek, the shock momentarily numbing the pain in my leg. "Mom, look at the screen out there," I said, my voice breaking. Keisha broke my leg. She showed everyone the truth. "You saw the X-ray." "I do not care about your stupid leg," Vivian screamed, stepping into my personal space. "I care about this family's name. You always have to be the center of attention. Oh, look at me, poor Maya the cripple. You dragged this stranger in here to put on a magic show with some fake medical pictures just to upstage your sister. You could have just stayed in the corner like we asked. But no, you had to make a scene." Brad let out a short, barking laugh. He walked over to the minibar and poured himself a drink, acting as if he were bored by the entire ordeal. "That was a cute trick out there, buddy," he said, pointing his glass at Marcus. "But we are not idiots. How much is she paying you?" Marcus did not blink. He stared at Brad with an intensity that would have made a lesser man crumble. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice dangerously low. "Oh, drop the act," Brad sneered, taking a sip of his scotch. He looked at my father with a conspiratorial grin. "Desmond, come on. You cannot believe this guy is a real surgeon. Look at him. He is too young, too smooth. He is probably some struggling actor she found on Craigslist. Or maybe a bouncer she hired to intimidate us. It is a shakedown. That is all this is. Maya is broke, so she staged a scene to guilt you into writing a check." Keisha, who had been cowering in the corner, suddenly found her courage again. "Exactly," she chimed in, wiping away crocodile tears. "She is jealous of my house. She is jealous of Brad. She wants to ruin everything because she is miserable and alone." My father finally spoke. He adjusted his cufflinks, regaining his composure. He turned to me, his eyes cold and hard like flint. "I do not care who he is," Desmond said. "Get him out of here, Maya, and then you are going to go back out there, take the microphone, and tell everyone it was a prank. A skit for my birthday roast. You will apologize to your sister and you will fix this. Or so help me God, you will never step foot in this family again." I looked at them. My mother worried about her reputation while I stood there in agony. My father demanding I lie to cover up their cruelty. My sister and her husband mocking the man who had saved my ability to walk. They did not see a daughter or a sister. They saw a liability. And in that moment, the last thread of hope I had held on to for 5 years finally snapped. My father reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo jacket. I expected a handkerchief to wipe his sweating forehead, or perhaps a phone to call security. Instead, he pulled out a small black leather notebook. It was worn at the edges, the kind of book a shopkeeper uses to track tabs, or a bookie uses to track debts. He tossed it onto the glass coffee table with a heavy thud. The sound echoed in the quiet room like a gavel striking a block. "You want to talk about fairness. Maya, let us talk about fairness," Desmond said, his voice dropping to that deceptively calm register he used right before he punished us as children. You think, because you brought a doctor in here with some pictures, that you are absolved of your responsibilities to this family. You think you are the victim. He flipped the book open with a practiced flick of his wrist. His finger, thick with gold rings, traced down a column of handwritten figures. I leaned forward, squinting at the pages. The ink was blue, and the handwriting was meticulous. October 14th. Physical therapy, copay $50. November 3rd, grocery bill share $200. December rent, $1,500. January heating surcharge, $300. My jaw tightened until my teeth ached. Dad, what is this? I asked, though a sick feeling in my gut told me I already knew exactly what I was looking at. This, he said, tapping the page hard enough to shake the water glasses on the table, is the ledger of your burden. You say we abandoned you. You say we do not care. But for 5 years, we have carried the weight of your mistakes. We housed you when you could not walk. We fed you when you were too depressed to cook. We paid for the lights you used and the water you showered in. I stared at him in disbelief. I moved out 4 years ago, Dad. I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. I paid for my own apartment. I paid for every single one of my surgeries with the insurance settlement money from the other driver. You never paid a dime. I have the bank statements. I have the receipts. You are charging me for air. Desmond ignored me completely. He turned the page and then another. Interest accrued, he muttered as if reading a bank statement. Emotional distress tax. Stress. Inconvenience fees. Loss of reputation penalty. He looked up, his eyes cold and dead. The total comes to $200,000, Maya. That is what you owe us. That is the price of being a disappointment. That is the cost of the damage you have done to this family. $200,000. The number hung in the air, absurd and terrifying. He was trying to monetize my existence. He was billing me for being his daughter. You cannot be serious, Marcus said from beside me, his body tense, ready to spring. This is extortion. You cannot charge your child for raising them, especially when you clearly did such a poor job of it. It is reimbursement, Desmond snapped. He stood up and walked over to me, looming over the chair where I sat. Listen to me, girl. You think taking the fall for your sister 5 years ago was a gift. You think it makes you a martyr. It does not. It was your duty. Keisha had a scholarship. She had a future. She had potential. You were just there. You were the older sister. It was your job to protect the asset. Taking that DUI charge was not a favor, Maya. It was rent. It was payment for breathing our air. It was the only thing of value you have ever contributed to this dynasty. And now you want to walk away. You want to shame us in public. Fine, you can go, but not until you settle your tab. You write us a check for $200,000, and you can crawl back to whatever hole you came from. But until then, you belong to us. You are an investment that has not paid off yet, and I am calling in the debt. Keisha stepped forward, effectively blocking my view of our father. She dabbed at her perfectly dry eyes with a cocktail napkin, her chest heaving in a performance that would have been impressive if it were not so grotesque. She looked at the ledger on the table, then at me, shaking her head, as if she were the one who had been mortally wounded. You are so selfish, Maya. She sniffed, her voice trembling with a manufactured frailty. Daddy is right about the money, but you do not understand the timing. You picked the worst possible night to pull this stunt. Do you know how much pressure I am under? Do you have any idea what it costs to be me? She paced the small room, her red dress swishing around her legs, the diamonds in her ears catching the light. Brad and I just went under contract for the estate in Buckhead, she wailed, throwing her hands up. The mortgage payments are astronomical. The interior designer alone costs more than you make in a decade. We are stretched thin, Maya. We are building an empire, a legacy for this family, and the stress is eating me alive. I cannot sleep. I cannot eat. And now you come here dragging your drama and your fake doctor, trying to ruin my reputation with the very investors we need to fund our lifestyle. If the financing falls through because you made us look unstable, I will never forgive you. She stopped pacing and leaned over me, her perfume cloying and suffocating. "You owe me," she hissed, her eyes hard and greedy. "You owe me for the stress. You owe me for the humiliation. And I know exactly how you are going to pay. I want Grandma's brownstone." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Our grandmother had left her historic home in the Fourth Ward to me explicitly. It was the one thing they had not been able to touch, a small paid-off property that represented my only true safety net. Keisha held out her hand, palm up. "I know you have the deed, Maya. Grandma left it to you because she pitied you, because she thought you were too broken to make it on your own. But let us be real. You do not need a 4-bedroom historic home. You are single. You are a cripple. You cannot even climb the stairs to the master bedroom. A studio apartment is enough for someone like you. I want you to sign the rights over to me, tonight, as a formal apology gift. We can flip it for a quick $500,000, or maybe I will turn it into a closet for my winter wardrobe. It does not matter. What matters is that you give it to me to make up for the damage you caused tonight." Before I could even process the audacity of her demand, Brad stepped in. He did not plead like Keisha. He moved with the arrogance of a man who believed he owned the world. He reached into his slim leather briefcase and pulled out a document. It was not a napkin or a scrap of paper. It was a formal quitclaim deed, already drafted, already printed. They had planned this. The birthday party, the humiliation, it was all just a prelude to this theft. He slammed the paper down on top of my father's ledger, the sound sharp, like a gunshot. "Sign it," Brad commanded, looming over me. His face was flushed with scotch and power. "Do not look at your boyfriend for help. He cannot save you from what I can do." "You seem to forget who I am, Maya. I am a broker. I control money for the most powerful families in Atlanta. I know how the system works because I am the system." He leaned down, his face inches from mine, his breath sour with alcohol. "If you do not sign that transfer of ownership right now, I will destroy you. I will make one phone call to my friends at the credit bureaus. I will red flag your social security number as high risk. I will tank your credit score so deep you will not be able to rent a bicycle, let alone an apartment. I will blacklist you from every bank and lending institution in Georgia. I will freeze your assets so fast your head will spin. You will be destitute, Maya. You will be on the street and no one will help you because I will spread the word that you are a fraud and a liability. I will make you unperson. So be a good little leech, pick up the pen and sign the house over to your sister. It is the only way you walk out of this room with a future." I stared at the quitclaim deed Brad had slammed onto the table. I looked at the ledger my father had presented, demanding payment for my existence. I looked at Keisha, who was practically vibrating with greedy anticipation, already mentally redecorating the home my grandmother had left me. They stood there, a united front of entitlement and cruelty, waiting for me to break. They expected the tears. They expected the pleading. They expected the Maya who had spent 5 years apologizing for being a burden, the Maya who would sign away her future just to stop the shouting. But as I looked at them, really looked at them, something inside me went quiet. The fear that had been gripping my chest since I walked into the party evaporated. The humiliation that had burned my cheeks turned into something cold and hard like steel. I realized I wasn't afraid of Brad's threats. I wasn't afraid of my father's anger. I wasn't afraid of losing them because I never really had them. They weren't my family. They were just people who knew my weak spots and how to exploit them. I didn't say a word. I didn't pick up the pen Brad had thrown at me. I didn't reach for the checkbook my father demanded. Instead, I shifted my weight, wincing slightly as pain shot up my shattered leg, but I didn't let it stop me. I moved past Brad, ignoring him, as if he were a piece of furniture. I walked to the head of the long mahogany conference table, the seat my father had vacated to loom over me. It was the seat of authority, the place where decisions were made. I pulled out the heavy, high-backed leather chair. The legs scraped against the floor, a harsh sound that made my mother flinch. I sat down slowly, deliberately, arranging my skirt over my injured leg. I rested my elbows on the polished wood and interlaced my fingers, leaning back as if I were presiding over a board meeting rather than my own extortion. The silence in the room stretched heavy and suffocating. My father's face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. Keisha looked confused, her smug smile faltering. Brad looked annoyed, his jaw working as he tried to figure out why his intimidation tactics weren't working. "What do you think you are doing?" my father sputtered, taking a step toward me. "Get out of my chair." I didn't answer him. I didn't even look at him. I turned my gaze to the corner of the room where Marcus stood. He had been silent this entire time, a statue of controlled rage watching them attack me. But he knew the plan. He knew who I really was. I gave him a single small nod. Marcus moved instantly. He didn't walk with the casual swagger of the party guests outside. He moved with precision, with purpose. He carried a briefcase in his hand that I knew very well. It wasn't a medical bag. It was a custom-made black crocodile skin attaché case with gold hardware. It was elegant, imposing, and expensive. It was the kind of briefcase that carried consequences. He walked to the table and placed the case directly in front of me, setting it down with a heavy, authoritative thud right on top of the papers Brad and my father had laid out. The sound was like a gavel striking a bench. He stepped back, crossing his arms over his chest, his eyes daring anyone to interfere. My mother looked at the briefcase, then at me, her eyes widening with a sudden dawning unease. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't respond. I placed my hands on the case. The crocodile skin was cool and textured under my fingertips. I felt the weight of it, the density of the secrets it held. This was my armor. This was my weapon. This was 5 years of work, 5 years of silence, 5 years of gathering the ammunition I needed for this exact moment. I looked at Keisha one last time. She was still trying to look bored, trying to maintain the illusion of superiority, but I saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes. She knew something was wrong. She just didn't know how wrong. I placed my thumbs on the gold latches. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of stale alcohol and expensive perfume that filled the room, and I let it out slowly. I was done being the victim. I was done being the scapegoat. I pressed down on the latches. Click. The sound was sharp, mechanical, and final. It echoed in the silent room like the cocking of a gun. It was the sound of a lock disengaging, but it felt like the sound of a guillotine blade dropping. That click was the line of demarcation. Before the click, I was Maya the cripple, Maya the leech. After the click, I was someone else entirely. I lifted the lid of the briefcase, and the air in the room seemed to change, charged with the static electricity of imminent destruction. The waiting was over. I reached into the velvet-lined interior of the case. There were no stacks of cash inside. There were no diamonds or jewels to pay off their extortion demands. There was just a single heavy cream-colored card holder. I pulled out a business card. It was not the flimsy paper kind you pick up at a networking event. It was thick, matte black metal with gold laser-etched lettering. It had weight. It had authority. I flicked it across the polished mahogany table. It spun like a shuriken, cutting through the tension in the room, and stopped perfectly in front of Brad. "Read it," I said. My voice was not the whisper of the broken daughter anymore. It was not the voice of the girl who apologized for taking up space. It was the voice I used when I walked into a boardroom to tell a CEO his CFO was embezzling millions. It was the voice of absolute command. Brad picked it up. His hands were shaking slightly. I watched his eyes scan the text. I saw the pupils dilate. I saw the color drain from his face, leaving him looking sickly and gray. It was the look of a man realizing he had brought a plastic knife to a nuclear war. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "What is this?" my father asked, frowning confused by Brad's reaction. "Is this another fake prop? Is this another part of your little show?" Brad looked at him, and for the first time there was genuine fear in his eyes. "It is real, Desmond," Brad whispered, his voice trembling. "This is real. This is a high-clearance Deloitte card." My mother leaned in, squinting at the gold text. "Senior Forensic Auditor, She read aloud the words, meaning nothing to her. What does that mean? Are you an accountant? I laughed, a dry, humorless sound that made Keisha flinch. You could say that, I said, standing up slowly. I did not need the table for support anymore. I did not lean on Marcus. I stood on my own 2 feet, pain and all. You called me a leech. You called me a burden. You thought I was sitting at home for 5 years crying over my leg waiting for your scraps. You thought I was unemployed, living off disability checks and your imaginary charity. I walked around the table, circling them like a shark. I have never been unemployed, not for a single day. While you were buying cars, you could not afford Keisha. I was traveling to London, Tokyo, and Zurich. While you were pretending to be a big-shot broker, Brad, I was auditing the banks you dream of working for. I am not a receptionist. I am not an assistant. I am a senior forensic auditor for Deloitte. I stopped behind my father's chair and leaned down close to his ear. Do you know what that means, Dad? It means Fortune 500 companies hire me to find the money that people try to hide. It means I specialize in detecting fraud, embezzlement, and financial misconduct. I hunt white-collar criminals. I track digital footprints that thieves think they have erased. I am the person nightmares are made of for people who cook their books. I do not just look at numbers. I look at the crimes hidden between them. I walked back to the head of the table and looked at them all. My family, my tormentors. They looked so small now, so insignificant. And as for the money, I said, looking at the pathetic ledger my father had written. You want $200,000 for raising me? You think that is a fortune? You think that is a life-changing amount of money that gives you power over me? I picked up the ledger and dropped it into the trash bin next to the table. I made that amount in consulting fees last month alone. My base salary is 7 figures. My performance bonuses are double that. I earn more in a single fiscal quarter than this entire family earns in a decade. My net worth is not something you can calculate on a napkin. I could buy this restaurant we are sitting in, fire the staff, and turn it into a storage unit for my shoes, and I would not even notice the dip in my bank account. My income is 10 times the combined total of every person sitting at this table, and that includes the imaginary assets Brad lies about on his tax returns. I leaned in close, my hands flat on the table. So let us be very clear about who is the leech here. Because looking at your finances, which I have been doing for 6 months, I am the only one in this room who is actually solvent. I am not the failure. I am the power. And you just tried to extort the wrong woman. I turned my gaze toward Brad. He was shifting in his seat, loosening his tie as if the air in the room had suddenly become too thin. He tried to muster that familiar arrogance, the sneer that he wore like a second skin, but his eyes betrayed him. They were darting around the room, looking for an exit that did not exist. You claim to be a master of the universe, Brad, I said, my voice calm and steady. You tell everyone you are a top broker, a financial wizard who turns lead into gold. You drive a leased Porsche and wear watches you cannot afford to convince my family that you are the golden ticket. But we both know the truth, do we not? I reached into the crocodile skin briefcase again. This time I pulled out a blue personnel file. It was thin, pathetic really, for a man who claimed to be a titan of industry. I slid it across the table. It stopped right next to his trembling hand. That is your termination letter from Merrill Lynch, I said. Dated 2 years ago. You were fired for incompetence and unauthorized trading. You have not held a job since. You are not a broker. You are not an analyst. You are unemployed. The room went deadly silent. Keisha gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Brad, is that true? She whispered. You told me you were working from home. You said you were consulting. He is consulting, all right, I continued, relentless. He is consulting on how to rob people blind. I pulled out a second stack of documents. These were thicker, bound with a heavy clip. Spreadsheets, bank transfers, the anatomy of a crime. You see, Dad, Brad has a secret business. He calls it the Alpha Strategy Fund. He promises 20% returns guaranteed. He tells investors he has a proprietary algorithm that beats the market every time. My father looked at Brad, confusion warring with dawning horror. I invested in that fund, Desmond said slowly. So did Ray. So did the pastor. Exactly, I said. And that is the problem. There is no algorithm, there is no trading, there is no profit. It is a classic Ponzi scheme. I flipped the document open to a page highlighted in neon yellow. Look at the inflows and outflows, Dad. Brad takes money from new investors like your golf buddies and the deacons at your church, and he uses it to pay dividends to the older investors to keep them happy. He skims the rest off the top to pay for Keisha's designer bags and that ridiculous car parked outside. He is not investing your money, he is eating it. Brad's face turned a shade of gray that looked like wet cement. He stood up so fast his chair tipped over backward, crashing onto the floor. "You shut up!" he screamed, spittle flying from his mouth. "You do not know what you are talking about. Those are complex financial instruments. You are just a bitter, jealous cripple trying to frame me." "I am a forensic auditor, Brad," I reminded him, my voice cutting through his hysteria like a scalpel. "I trace money for a living. And I traced yours. It goes from your investors straight into your personal checking account, and then it disappears into online casinos and luxury retail stores. You are insolvent. The fund is empty. If every investor asked for their money back today, you would not be able to pay out a single dime. You are robbing Peter to pay Paul, and Peter is about to call the police." Panic overtook him. He realized the paper trail on the table was enough to put him away for 20 years. He lunged across the table, his hands clawing for the documents. He was desperate, a cornered animal trying to destroy the evidence of his own destruction. "Give me those," he roared, reaching for the file. He never made it. Marcus moved with a speed that defied his size. He did not just step in, he intercepted. He caught Brad's wrist in mid-air, his grip like an iron vise. He twisted, using Brad's own momentum against him, and shoved him back. Brad stumbled, his legs hitting the edge of the overturned chair, and he collapsed into a heap on the carpet. Marcus stood over him, adjusting his cuffs, looking down with absolute disgust. "Do not touch the evidence," Marcus said, his voice low and terrifying. "And do not ever think about touching her. You are done here. Sit down and shut up before I break something that I refuse to fix." Brad scrambled back, terrified, looking up at the surgeon and then at the damning papers on the table. The Wolf of Wall Street was just a thief in a cheap suit, and everyone in the room finally saw him for exactly what he was. Keisha looked down at her husband, who was currently groveling on the floor, and her face twisted in disgust. She stepped away from him, smoothing her dress as if his failure might be contagious. "You are pathetic, Brad," she spat. "I cannot believe I married a thief." She turned to our parents, her eyes wide and innocent tears welling up on command. "Daddy, Mom, I swear I did not know. He lied to me. He told me his fund was doing amazing. I am a victim here too. He tricked me just like he tricked you." I almost admired the speed of her pivot. She was willing to throw her partner to the wolves to save her own skin. But I was not done, not even close. I watched her performance with the cold detachment of an auditor watching a CEO try to explain away a missing ledger. "You are not a victim, Keisha," I said, my voice cutting through her sob story. "You are a co-conspirator, and you are a liar." "What are you talking about?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "I have my own money. I have my own career. I am buying the Buckhead estate with my own funds. I am a successful influencer." I reached into the briefcase again. This time I pulled out a glossy printout. It was a screenshot of a listing from a vacation rental website. I held it up for the room to see. It showed the grand foyer of the mansion Keisha had been posting on Instagram for the last 3 months. The caption on the screen read, "Buckhead Luxury Retreat, monthly stays available, hosted by Brenda." "You are not in escrow, Keisha," I said, walking toward her. "You are in a long-term Airbnb rental. You did not buy that house. You are renting it for $6,000 a week to stage photos for your social media. Those renovation updates you post, That is just you, moving the host's furniture around when she is not looking. You do not own a single brick of that estate. You are paying a fortune to pretend you are rich for an audience of strangers who do not even know your real last name. Keisha froze. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. But that was just the warm-up. The real blow was waiting in the manila envelope still sitting in my briefcase. But renting a mansion is expensive, I continued, my voice dropping an octave. Even with Brad stealing from Dad's friends, you needed more cash to keep up the charade. You needed a lump sum to pay the deposit and the first 3 months of rent. And since you do not have a job and your credit cards are maxed out, you had to find another source. I pulled out the envelope. I saw my father's eyes track the movement. He looked old suddenly, the fight draining out of him as he realized there was more. "What did you do, Keisha?" he whispered. "She did what she always does," I answered for her. "She took what was not hers." I slid a heavy document across the table. It was a deed of trust. A mortgage agreement. "Look at the address, Dad. It is not the Buckhead Mansion. It is 422 Oak Street, your house. The house you paid off 10 years ago. The house you plan to retire in." My mother gasped, clutching her chest. "No, that is impossible. The deed is in the safe." "It was in the safe," I corrected. "Until Keisha stole it, forged your signatures, and took out a high-interest second mortgage on your home. She cashed out $300,000 of your equity 3 months ago." Keisha screamed. "It is a lie! She faked those papers." I ignored her and turned to the last page of the document. "I hired a handwriting expert, Keisha. He confirmed that while the signature reads, 'Desmond, the pen pressure and loop style are a perfect match for your writing,' you mortgaged Mom and Dad's home to pay for a rental house and a lifestyle you cannot afford." I dumped the contents of a smaller envelope onto the table. "Receipts. Dozens of them. And you did not even spend it on investments. You did not try to save Brad's fund. You blew it. Here is a receipt for a $40,000 Hermes bag. Here is a $20,000 charge for a first-class trip to Dubai for you and your friends. Here is a $10,000 bill for a stylist. You literally burned your parents' retirement home to buy clothes for Instagram." My father picked up the mortgage document. His hands were shaking so badly the paper rattled. He stared at the forged signature, then at the date. He looked at Keisha, his golden child, the daughter he had protected, the daughter he had sacrificed me for. "You sold our house," he whispered, his voice broken. "You sold our house for handbags." "I did not mean to," Keisha wailed, realizing she was cornered. "I was going to pay it back. Brad was supposed to close a big deal. We were going to flip the money." "There was no deal," I shouted, slamming my hand on the table. "There never was. You gambled their roof over their heads on a fantasy. And guess what, Dad? She missed the first 3 payments. I checked the county records this morning. The bank has already initiated foreclosure proceedings. You do not just have a mortgage you did not know about. You are about to lose the house entirely. You are homeless, and she is the one who put you on the street." My father slumped in his chair, his face a mask of absolute defeat. He looked at the mortgage papers for the house he thought he owned free and clear. Then he looked at Keisha, who was sobbing into her hands. For a moment, I almost pitied him. He had spent his entire life building a fortress of respectability, and his favorite daughter had just sold the bricks out from under him. He took a ragged breath, his hand trembling as he loosened his bow tie. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading for some kind of mercy, some way out of this nightmare. "Fine," he rasped, his voice sounding like sandpaper. "We will sell the rental property in Savannah. We will liquidate the stock portfolio. I have my retirement fund. It is over $1 million. It will hurt, but we can pay off the bank. We can fix this. We are not destitute yet." I felt a cold chill run through me. This was the moment. The house was painful, but this was the kill shot. This was the end of Desmond's world. I walked over to the window, looking out at the Buckhead skyline, then turned back to face him. I wished for just a second that he had been a better father so I did not have to do this. But then I remembered the ledger. I remembered the $200,000 bill he handed me for raising me. "You do not have a portfolio, Dad," I said softly. "What are you talking about?" He snapped, a flicker of his old arrogance returning. "I have been contributing to that fund for 30 years. It is managed by the best. It was managed by the best," I corrected. "Until last week." I walked back to the table and picked up the final document from my briefcase. It was a single sheet of paper, simple and devastating. "Do you remember the papers Brad brought you last month? The ones he said were for restructuring your assets to lower your tax liability? He told you it was a routine transfer to a more aggressive growth fund because the market was rallying." Desmond nodded slowly, confusion clouding his eyes. "Yes, the growth fund. Brad said he could get me 15%. I slid the paper in front of him. "That was not a transfer request, Dad. That was a limited power of attorney. You gave Brad full unrestricted access to your primary retirement accounts. You gave him the legal right to liquidate everything without your signature." Desmond looked at Brad. Brad was still on the floor, but he had stopped trying to get up. He was curled in on himself, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. "Brad," Desmond said, his voice shaking. "Tell her she is lying. Tell me my money is safe." Brad did not answer. I placed a bank statement on top of the power of attorney. It was dated 3 days ago. The balance at the bottom was highlighted in yellow. It read $0.00. "He emptied it, Dad," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "Last Tuesday. He wired the entire balance, $1,042,000, out of your Vanguard account." "Where is it?" Desmond roared, standing up so fast his chair flew backward. He lunged toward Brad, but Marcus stepped in, holding him back with one arm. "Where is my money, Brad? Did you put it in the Ponzi scheme? Is it in an offshore account?" "No," I answered. "It is not in an account at all. It is gone." I dropped a stack of transaction records onto the table. They fanned out like a deck of cards. "Take a look at the merchant codes. Dad, these are not investments. These are wire transfers to Malta and Curaçao. Bet Online, Bovada, DraftKings." I picked up one of the sheets. "Brad has a gambling problem, Dad. A massive one. He did not just lose his own money. He did not just lose his investors' money. When the walls started closing in on his Ponzi scheme, he panicked. He needed a big win to pay everyone back. He thought he could double your money on a high-stakes poker tournament online." I looked at Brad, who was now weeping silently. "He put your entire life savings on black, Dad, and it came up red. He lost everything in 48 hours. Every penny you saved for 30 years is sitting in the pockets of an offshore casino owner." The color drained from my father's face so fast I thought he had died standing up. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at the statement, staring at the zero balance as if he could change it by sheer force of will. His hand flew to his chest, clutching the fabric of his shirt over his heart. He swayed, his knees buckling. "Desmond!" My mother screamed, rushing to his side. He collapsed back into the chair Marcus had righted for him, gasping for air. His eyes were wide and unseeing, fixed on a horror only he could see. He was a man who defined himself by his provider status, by his financial security. In the span of 20 minutes, he had learned he was homeless and penniless. The empire he thought he ruled was a mirage. He gasped, a wet, rattling sound. "My retirement." He wheezed, tears leaking from his eyes. "My life. Gone. It is all gone." He looked at Brad, who was still cowering on the floor. "You," he whispered. "I treated you like a son. I gave you my daughter. I trusted you." "I am sorry," Brad sobbed. "I thought I could win it back. I had a system my father choked out." He clutched his chest tighter, his face twisting in agony. "You gambled my life on a system." Marcus moved instantly, his doctor instincts taking over. He placed 2 fingers on my father's wrist and checked his pulse, then looked into his eyes. "He is going into shock," Marcus said sharply. "His heart rate is erratic. We need to get him to a hospital now." But I did not move to help. I stood at the head of the table watching the man who had tried to charge me for my childhood, now clutching his chest, because the son he actually wanted had destroyed him. The irony was bitter and cold. He had lost his money to a gambler and his house to a fraud, all while calling me the leech. The sound of my father gasping for air should have been the only thing that mattered in that room. But for Keisha and Brad, his medical emergency was just background noise to their own implosion. The revelation that the money was gone, truly gone, snapped the last tether of civility holding their marriage together. Keisha did not rush to help her father. She did not call for an ambulance. Instead, she let out a shriek that sounded more like a banshee than a human being and launched herself at her husband. "You thief!" she screamed, her manicured nails clawing at Brad's face. "You told me you were a genius. You told me you had a system. You gambled away my inheritance. You gambled away my future." Brad, who had been cowering on the floor moments ago, suddenly found a reserve of vicious strength born of pure desperation. He shoved Keisha back hard enough that she stumbled and fell against the wet bar, knocking over a crystal decanter of scotch. The glass shattered, sending amber liquid pooling across the carpet, mixing with the tension in the air. "Do not put this on me," Brad roared, scrambling to his feet. His suit was rumpled, his tie hanging loose like a noose. "You drove me to this, Keisha. You. It was never enough for you. I made 6 figures legitimately, but you said it was poverty wages. You needed the G-Wagon. You needed the private flights. You needed to look richer than your sister every single day. I deserved those things," Keisha shrieked, her face twisted into an ugly mask of entitlement. "I am a brand. I have followers. I have an image to maintain. You promised to take care of me. You promised me the world, and you gave me a stolen house and a mountain of debt." "I stole for you," Brad shouted back, pointing a shaking finger in her face. "I started the fund because you threatened to leave me if I did not buy you that estate. You said you would find a baller, remember? You said you would find a real man who could afford you. So I became a criminal to keep you happy. And you spent it faster than I could steal it. Do you know how hard it is to embezzle $1 million while your wife is spending $50,000 a week on shoes?" "You are a liar," Keisha spat, throwing a heavy glass tumbler at him. It missed his head by inches and smashed against the wall. "You are just a gambling addict. You did not do this for me. You did it for the rush. You are sick. And you are a vampire," Brad retorted, not even flinching at the broken glass. "You drained me dry. You drained your parents dry. You even tried to drain your crippled sister dry. You do not love anyone, Keisha. You just love what people can buy for you. I should have left you the day you asked me to forge your dad's signature on that power of attorney. I did not ask you to do that." Keisha lied, her eyes darting to our mother, who was still huddled over our father. "You said it was standard procedure." "Oh, stop it." Brad laughed, a manic, terrifying sound. "You held the pen, Brad. You practiced his signature for 3 hours until you got it right. Do not try to pin the forgery on me. I just clicked the mouse to send the wire. You signed the death warrant on his retirement." I sat at the head of the table, the chaos swirling around me like a storm I had summoned but no longer needed to control. I reached for the pitcher of ice water Marcus had placed on the table earlier. My movements were slow, deliberate. I poured a glass, the ice clinking softly against the crystal. It was a pleasant sound, a sharp contrast to the screaming match in front of me. I took a sip. The water was cold and clean. I watched them tear each other apart with the clinical detachment of a judge watching a guilty plea bargain go wrong. They were doing my work for me. I did not need to destroy them. I just had to turn on the lights and let them see each other clearly for the first time. They were cannibals feasting on each other's failures to save their own skins. "Look at them, Marcus," I said softly, not caring if they heard me. "They deserve each other." Keisha was sobbing now, big heaving breaths that were finally real, not because she was sorry, but because she was trapped. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Maya, please, he is lying. You know he is a liar. Help me. I am your sister." I took another sip of water. I set the glass down on a coaster, careful not to leave a ring on the wood. "You are not my sister Keisha," I said, my voice cutting through her hysterics. "You are just a co-defendant, and I suggest you save your tears. You are going to need them for the jury." The fighting between Keisha and Brad had turned into a whimpering stalemate, but I wasn't interested in their marital collapse. I had one final reality check to deliver, and it was going to hurt the most. I looked at my parents. Desmond was still slumped in his chair, clutching his chest, gray-faced and broken. Vivian was hovering over him, dabbing his forehead with a napkin, looking terrified not for his health, but for their future. They were mourning the loss of their savings, but they hadn't yet grasped the immediacy of their ruin. I cleared my throat. The sound was sharp in the tense room. "You are worried about your retirement fund," I said, my voice slicing through their panic. "You are worried about the future, but you are looking too far ahead. You need to be worried about tomorrow morning." My father looked up, his eyes glassy. "What more can there be, Maya?" he rasped. "He took everything. Not everything I corrected. Not yet." I picked up a document with a bright red stamp on the cover. It was the one piece of paper Brad and Keisha had tried hardest to hide, burying it under the piles of fake investment reports. I slid it across the table until it rested right under my father's nose. "That is a notice of foreclosure sale," I said. "Keisha stopped paying the mortgage on your house 6 months ago." She intercepted the warning letters. She threw away the certified mail. She hid the process server notices, but the bank does not stop just because you ignore them. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. "No," she whispered. "Not the house, not our home." "The bank obtained a final judgment of foreclosure last week," I continued, relentless. "The sheriff is scheduled to execute the eviction order tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp." The room went dead silent. The air seemed to leave the space. "Tomorrow," my father choked out. "Tomorrow morning." "Yes," I said. "You do not just have $0 in the bank. You have less than 12 hours before you are living on the street. The locks will be changed. Your furniture, your clothes, your precious family photos, everything inside will be seized by the bank to pay off Keisha's debt. You are not just broke, Dad. You are homeless." The reality hit them with the force of a physical blow. Homeless, destitute. The pillars of the Atlanta community were about to be the scandal of the decade. They would be locked out of their own estate while the neighbors watched. And then I saw the shift. I saw the moment their pride finally died, replaced by a desperate, clawing need for survival. They looked at Keisha, who was useless to them now, just a weeping mess in a red dress. Then they looked at me. They looked at the crocodile briefcase. They looked at the woman they had called a leech 5 minutes ago, and they realized I was the only lifeline they had left. My mother moved first. She did not walk. She scrambled. She fell to her knees on the plush carpet, ignoring the spilled scotch and the broken glass. She crawled toward the head of the table, reaching out with hands that were shaking uncontrollably. "Maya," she sobbed, grabbing the hem of my skirt. "Maya, baby, please! You have to help us! You cannot let this happen!" My father slid out of his chair, his legs giving way. He landed heavily beside her. He did not look like a patriarch anymore. He looked like a beggar. He clasped his hands together, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the sweat of his panic. "Save us, Maya," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "You have the money. We saw the papers. You are rich. You can write a check right now." "Please," my mother cried, tightening her grip on my skirt. "It is nothing to you. You make that in a week. Just pay the bank. Save your parents. Keisha is just a child. She is foolish. She did not mean to hurt us. She made a mistake." The words twisted in my gut like a knife. Keisha is foolish. She stole their home, stole their retirement, and destroyed their lives, and she was just foolish. But I was the responsible one. I was the one expected to clean up the mess. "You are our good daughter." My father wept. "You are the smart one. Help us, Maya. Don't let us lose everything." I looked down at them. My parents. The people who had charged me rent for existing were now kneeling at my feet, begging for salvation. It was the image I had dreamed of during those long nights in the hospital, but now that it was here, it just felt cold. I pulled my skirt from my mother's grasp and stood up. "You want me to save you?" I asked. "You want me to use my money to fix her mistake?" "Yes." My mother breathed hope flaring in her eyes. "Yes, please." I looked at Marcus. He gave me a small, grim nod. He handed me the final folder. "I am not going to pay off the mortgage," I said. My mother wailed a sound of pure despair. "I am not going to pay it off because the bank does not own the debt anymore," I said, opening the folder. "I bought the note this morning. You misunderstand the situation completely. I did not write a check to the bank to clear your name. I did not pay off the arrears to be a good daughter." I pulled a heavy document from the folder and held it up so the light from the chandelier hit the embossed seal on the front. "This is a trustee's deed upon sale. 3 days ago, the bank decided they were tired of chasing you for payments you were never going to make. They categorized the mortgage on 422 Oak Street as a toxic asset. They wanted it off their books before the end of the fiscal quarter. They put the note up for auction to qualified private equity firms. My firm, Obsidian Capital. We specialize in distressed assets. We buy debt that no one else wants, and we turn it into profit." I dropped the deed onto the table. It landed with a slap that sounded louder than the slap my mother had given me earlier. I was the highest bidder, Dad. I bought the note for 60 cents on the dollar. I did not pay off your mortgage. I became your mortgage holder. The bank does not own your house anymore. Keisha does not own your house. You certainly do not own your house. I leaned forward, placing both hands flat on the table and looking my father in the eye. "I own it. Every brick, every shingle, the ground beneath your feet, the roof over your head, the dining room you are sitting in right now. It all belongs to me. Legally speaking, you are not homeowners anymore. You are squatters." My mother let out a strangled sound, clutching her throat. "You bought our house," she whispered. "You bought our home from underneath us." "I bought an asset," I corrected her coldly. "An asset that was being mismanaged by the previous owners. If I had not stepped in, the sheriff would be putting padlocks on the doors tomorrow morning at 9. Strangers would be tossing your antique furniture onto the curb. You would be standing on the sidewalk watching your neighbors film your humiliation on their phones. I stopped that from happening. But do not confuse a business decision with charity." Desmond stared at the deed, his face a mask of gray shock. He reached out a shaking hand to touch the paper, as if he needed to feel the texture, to believe the nightmare was real. "You are our landlord," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "My own daughter is my landlord. Technically, I am the owner," I said. "You are currently unauthorized occupants. I have the legal right to file for an immediate eviction order. I could have the marshals here in 24 hours to escort you off the premises. I could sell the property next week to a developer who wants to bulldoze it and put up condos. I could turn it into a rental property for college students. It is my property to do with as I please." The power dynamic in the room shifted so violently it was almost palpable. 10 minutes ago, they were the patriarch and matriarch demanding payment for my childhood. They were the rulers of the family threatening to banish me. Now they were guests in my house. They were sitting in chairs that I effectively owned, drinking water from glasses that were legally mine. My mother looked at me with a mixture of terror and awe. She had spent 30 years thinking I was weak, thinking I was broken. Now she was looking at the woman who held her entire life in the palm of her hand. "Maya," she stammered, her voice trembling. You would not put your parents on the street. We are family." I laughed, a short, sharp sound. Family. That is a funny word, Mom. Was I family when you watched Keisha break my leg and did nothing? Was I family when you handed me a bill for $200,000 for raising me? Was I family when you told me to get out because I was ruining the party? You cannot use that word as a shield only when it suits you. I walked around the table, slowly enjoying the sound of my heels on the hardwood floor. My floor. I stopped behind my father's chair. You told me earlier that I belonged to you until I paid my debt. You said I was an investment that had not paid off. Well, Dad, the tables have turned. I am the investor now. And I am looking at my portfolio and wondering if I should liquidate this particular asset. You have no leverage, you have no money, you have no home. You exist in this space solely because I allow it. So before you ask me for another favor, before you try to guilt me with blood ties, remember who signs the deed. You are not the masters of this house anymore. You are just tenants who are very late on their rent. Marcus stepped out of the shadows where he had been standing guard. He did not look like a doctor in that moment. He looked like an executioner. He walked to the table with a heavy, deliberate stride, placing a thick white binder directly in front of Keisha. The sound of it hitting the wood was different than the financial documents. It sounded sterile. It sounded final. You think losing the house is your nightmare? Marcus said, his voice dangerously calm. You think being homeless is the worst thing that is going to happen to you tonight. You are wrong. Bankruptcy is a civil matter, Keisha. What is in this binder is criminal. He flipped the cover open. It was not a ledger of debts. It was a medical history report, a controlled substance monitoring database log. The pages were covered in red ink. When I took over Maya's case, I ran a standard background check on her medication history. Marcus explained, his eyes locking onto Keisha's terrified face. I wanted to make sure there were no contraindications for her surgery. Maya told me she does not take painkillers. She manages her pain with physical therapy and grit because she refuses to be dependent on anything. But this report tells a different story. He spun the binder around. My parents leaned in confusion, etched on their faces. They saw lists of dates, pharmacy names, and drug quantities. Oxycodone, hydrocodone, fentanyl patches, thousands of pills dispensed over the last 3 years. My mother looked at me, her eyes wide with sudden suspicion. Maya, she whispered, are you an addict? Is this why you have been hiding? Marcus slammed his hand on the table, making my mother jump. Do not you dare, he snarled. Do not you dare try to pin this on her. Maya has never filled a single one of these prescriptions. Look at the dates, Vivian. Look at the locations. These scripts were filled at pharmacies in Buckhead and Sandy Springs and Alpharetta. They were filled on days when Maya was in London auditing a bank. They were filled on days when Maya was in my office getting x-rays. He pointed a finger at Keisha. You stole her insurance card. You stole her medical identity. You went to urgent care clinics and pain management centers pretending to be her. You used the x-rays of her shattered leg, the leg you broke, to convince doctors to write you scripts for the strongest opioids on the market. You used her pain as your alibi. You walked in there with a cane faking a limp, and you used her tragedy to score drugs. I needed them for my back. Keisha shrieked, her voice shrill and panicked. I have scoliosis. You know I have back pain. You filled 12 prescriptions for 80 milligram OxyContin in a single month. Marcus shouted, his voice booming in the small room. That is enough to kill a herd of elephants, Keisha. You did not take them. You sold them. He pulled a police report from the back of the binder and threw it on top of the logs. This is from a raid the Atlanta Police Department conducted 3 months ago on a trap house in Bankhead. They found baggies of pills. And guess whose name was on the bottles? Maya Desmond. You have been running a distribution ring. You have been selling opioids on the black market to pay for your car note and your designer shoes. You are not just a thief, Keisha. You are a drug dealer. My father let out a strangled sob. He looked at his golden child, his princess, and saw a monster. Drug dealer, he wheezed. My daughter. It is a federal crime. Marcus continued, relentless. Medical identity theft, insurance fraud, distribution of a schedule, 2 narcotic, and because you crossed state lines to fill some of these scripts in Alabama, when the Georgia doctors cut you off, the DEA is involved. This is not a family dispute. This is a federal indictment. Mandatory minimums, Keisha. You are looking at 20 years in a federal penitentiary. You tried to frame your sister as a junkie so you could live like a queen. Well, the party is over. The feds are not interested in your Instagram following. They are interested in the trail of bodies you left behind. There is one last thing, Dad. One last entry in your ledger that we need to correct. You charged me $50,000 for the increase in your car insurance premiums after the crash. You charged me for the legal fees to keep me out of jail. You told everyone I was a drunk driver who crippled herself and nearly killed her sister. You made me carry that shame for 5 years. You made me apologize to Keisha every Thanksgiving for ruining her life. But we both know who was driving that night, don't we? Keisha was high on pills. She passed out at the wheel doing 80 on the interstate. I was the one screaming for her to wake up. I was the one who grabbed the wheel to keep us from hitting a minivan full of kids. I took the impact on my side to save her. But that is not the secret. Everyone in this room knows Keisha was driving. Mom knows. You know. The secret is what happened after the crash. You got to the scene before the ambulance, Dad. You saw me bleeding out in the passenger seat. You saw Keisha without a scratch crying about her scholarship. And you made a choice. You did not just tell me to take the blame. You bought the truth. Officer Miller was the first responder. He smelled the vodka on Keisha's breath. He saw the bruising on her chest from the driver's side seatbelt. He knew. But you pulled him aside. You opened your trunk. You gave him a gym bag with $50,000 in cash to wipe down the steering wheel and write the report the way you wanted it. You bribed a police officer to frame your own daughter. Miller is retired now, Dad. He has stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He found Jesus, and he wants to clear his conscience before he meets his maker. I visited him in the hospice center last week. He told me everything. He told me about the cash. He told me about how you begged him to save Keisha because she was the special one and I was just the surplus. He signed a sworn affidavit. He recorded a video confession. It is all here. You are not just a bad father. You are a felon. You obstructed justice. You tampered with evidence. And unlike the statute of limitations on debt, the statute of limitations on corruption does not run out when you have a dying man's confession. You sacrificed my body, my reputation, and my freedom to protect her future. You let me limp for 5 years while she danced on my grave. You let the world think I was a criminal so she could be a princess. Well, the princess is going to prison, and the king is going down with her. Miller is testifying, Dad. He is going to tell the jury exactly how much it cost to buy your daughter's life. And I hope it was worth it because it is the last deal you will ever make. The heavy oak doors to the private suite crashed open with a force that shook the walls. It wasn't a knock. It was a raid. 6 men in windbreakers, emblazoned with FBI, entered the room with weapons drawn, followed by 4 uniformed Atlanta police officers. The air in the room shifted from family drama to federal crime scene in a single heartbeat. My father shrank back in his chair, clutching his chest, looking from the agents to me with wide, terrified eyes. He realized then that this wasn't just a conversation, it was a sting operation. Marcus checked his watch and stepped aside calmly, as if he had timed their arrival down to the second. He had. While I was laying out the evidence, he had been texting the lead agent on the task force he had been working with for months. The trap was sprung. 2 agents moved directly to Brad. He didn't try to run. He didn't try to fight. He just slumped against the wall, sliding down until he hit the floor. Bradley Johnson, the lead agent, announced, his voice booming. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. Get up." Brad sobbed as they hauled him to his feet. The handcuffs clicked shut with a metallic finality that cut through his weeping. It wasn't me, he blubbered, snot running down his face. It was her. She made me do it. I just wanted to be rich. They didn't listen. They spun him around and marched him toward the door. But the main event was just beginning. 2 female officers approached Keisha. She backed away until she hit the wet bar, knocking over another glass. "No," she whispered, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. "No, you cannot touch me. My father is Desmond Desmond. I am an influencer. Keisha Desmond." the officer said, pulling Keisha's hands behind her back with practiced efficiency. You are under arrest for federal identity theft, insurance fraud, and distribution of a Schedule II narcotic. You have the right to remain silent. Keisha screamed. It was a primal, ugly sound that tore through her throat. "Daddy, help me!" she shrieked, struggling against the cuffs. "Do not let them take me. I am your princess. Fix it, Daddy. Fix it." But Desmond could not fix this. He sat frozen, watching his golden child disintegrate. Keisha fought them. She kicked and thrashed, her designer heels scraping against the floor. Her hair, usually so perfect, was a wild tangle around her face. Tears and sweat mixed with her expensive mascara, creating black streaks that ran down her cheeks, like war paint gone wrong. Her face was red and blotchy, twisted into a mask of pure terror. The facade of the elegant socialite was gone, stripped away, to reveal the scared, greedy criminal underneath. They dragged her toward the door. She dug her heels into the carpet, leaving tracks. "I am not a criminal," she wailed, looking at me with hatred burning through her tears. "This is your fault, Maya. You did this to me. You are the monster." I watched her go. I watched the sister who broke my leg, the sister who stole my identity, the sister who sold our parents' home get dragged out of the room like common trash. As they pulled her into the hallway, the guests from the party outside turned to look. The investors, the socialites, the people she had tried so hard to impress. They saw Keisha in handcuffs, screaming like a banshee. Her makeup smeared, her dress torn. They saw the truth. And for the first time in 5 years, I felt a deep, settling peace. The leech had finally been removed. The silence that descended on the private suite after the police left was heavier than the shouting had been. The party outside had dispersed, the guests, fleeing the scandal like rats escaping a sinking ship. My parents stood alone in the wreckage of their life. The shattered glass, the spilled scotch, and the empty chairs were all that remained of their dynasty. My mother, Vivian, looked at me, her eyes swollen and red. She did not look like the matriarch of Atlanta society anymore. She looked like a frightened old woman. "Maya," she whispered, her voice trembling, "please do not leave us like this. We have nowhere to go. We are too old to start over. Please forgive us. We are your parents." My father, Desmond, could not even speak. He just stared at the floor, his hands shaking by his sides. The man who had tried to bill me for my childhood was now entirely dependent on my mercy. I reached into my briefcase one last time. I did not pull out a check. I did not pull out a plane ticket. I pulled out a stapled document and a pen. I walked over to the table and set it down in front of them. "I am not going to kick you out onto the street tonight," I said, my voice devoid of warmth. "I am not cruel like you. You can stay in the house." Hope flared in my mother's eyes. "Oh, thank you, Maya. Thank you. We knew you would not abandon us." I held up a hand, stopping her gratitude. "I said you can stay. I did not say you can stay for free. This is a standard residential lease agreement. The rent is $4,500 a month, which is fair market value for a property of that size in that neighborhood. You will pay the first and last month's rent by Monday, or you will be evicted." My father looked up, his jaw dropping. "We have no money, Maya. You know that. Brad lost everything. How can we pay rent?" I looked him up and down. "You are an able-bodied man, Desmond. You can work. I heard the country club is hiring night janitors. I am sure they would hire you. You spent enough years paying membership dues there. Maybe they will give you a uniform that fits. And Mom, I know the local grocery store needs cashiers. It is minimum wage, but if you both work double shifts, you should be able to scrape together enough to keep a roof over your heads." "Work," my mother gasped, clutching her pearls. "Manual labor. We are pillars of this community. We cannot be seen scrubbing floors or bagging groceries. It would be humiliating." "It is called earning a living, Mom," I said coldly. "It is what you told me to do when I was disabled and in pain. You told me to pull myself up by my bootstraps. Well, here are your boots. You wanted to live for appearances. You wanted to sacrifice your daughter to maintain your image. Now you lose the image to survive. You will work. You will sweat. And every time you hand over that rent check, you will remember the $200,000 bill you tried to stick me with. You are not the owners anymore. You are the help. Sign the lease or get out. It is the only offer I am going to make. Walking away from that table felt like walking away from a burning building. I did not look back at my parents huddled over the lease agreement, their faces buried in their hands. I did not look back at the empty chair where Keisha had sat before the police dragged her away in cuffs. The sound of my mother's weeping faded as the heavy oak doors closed behind us, sealing them in the prison of their own making. The silence of the hallway was heavy, but it was clean. It was the silence of an ending. Marcus walked beside me, his presence a steady grounding force. He did not try to hold me up or offer his arm. He knew I needed to do this on my own. My legs screamed in protest with every step, the titanium rods vibrating with the effort, but I grit my teeth and kept moving. The pain was sharp and real, but for the first time in 5 years, it felt like my own pain, not a punishment inflicted by them. It was the pain of healing, not the pain of injury. We stepped out into the cool night air of Atlanta. The valet stand was quiet, the party guests long gone, having fled the scandal like cockroaches scattering under a sudden light. The humidity had broken, leaving the air crisp and smelling of rain. The city lights twinkled in the distance, indifferent to the destruction I had just wrought. It was beautiful. I stopped at a large concrete trash receptacle near the curb. I looked at the aluminum crutch in my hand. It was scratched and dented, the rubber tip worn down from years of navigating a world that saw me as broken. It had been my constant companion, my symbol of dependency, the visible mark of my shame. I hated it more than I had ever hated anything in my life. I lifted it up, feeling the weight of it one last time. Then, with a grunt of effort, I shoved it into the bin. It clattered against the metal sides and settled into the darkness among the discarded napkins and empty champagne bottles. I stood there swaying slightly, my weight fully on my shattered leg. It hurt. God, it hurt. But I was standing. I was upright. And I was free. Marcus watched me, his dark eyes filled with an emotion that looked a lot like awe. "You do not need that anymore?" he asked softly. I shook my head. "No," I said. "I never needed it. I just let them convince me I couldn't stand without them. I let them break my spirit because they had already broken my body. But my spirit healed faster than my bones." He stepped closer, reaching out to tuck a stray lock of hair behind my ear. His touch was gentle, a stark contrast to the violence of the evening. "Are you okay, Maya?" he asked. I looked at him. I looked at the empty doorway of the restaurant. I looked at the stars above. For 5 years I had been the leech. I had been the burden. I had been the mistake. But tonight, I had balanced the books. I had closed the account. "I have never been better," I replied, a smile spreading across my face that felt genuine and bright. My leg might always hurt, Marcus. The bones might never knit together perfectly. But my life is finally healed. He smiled back, that rare, dazzling smile that melted the surgeon's icy exterior. "Good. Let's go home." He opened the door to his silver Bentley. I slid into the soft leather seat, the scent of new car and freedom filling my lungs. As he drove us away, the restaurant shrinking in the rearview mirror, I felt a profound sense of peace settling over me. I left them behind in the wreckage they had built. I left them with their debts and their shame and their empty pride. They called me a parasite, but as we sped toward the city lights, I knew the truth. I was never the leech. I was the cure. And tonight the surgery was a complete success. This story serves as a powerful reminder that sharing DNA does not make you family. Loyalty, respect, and love do. Maya spent years believing she was a burden, dimmed by the gaslighting of those who needed a scapegoat for their own failures. But her journey proves that true power lies in silence and preparation. We learned that you cannot buy love from people committed to misunderstanding you, and the most liberating moment of your life is when you stop apologizing for your existence. Your worth is innate, not a debt to be repaid to those who broke you. If you cheered for Maya's freedom, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about reclaiming your power.